Right, with the leatherettes off the front, we can remove the front of the camera. Now, what I normally do is to remove the front rings from the shutter first and put them carefully to one side. So we've got 3 screws here holding the front cover on. One screw is longer than its mates, this one here. Bottom right hand corner as you hold the camera to use. Two shorter screws here. Front ring should lift off. This is the ring that opens the lens diaphragm to full aperture when you're viewing. Okay, 4 screws hold the front of the camera on. Oh, we can lift this pinion out first. This one towards the centre, just a small pinion. This one here towards the edge is on a shaft. They couple those front control rings to the drum that has the cord for the meter. Alright, so 4 screws from the front of the camera. I'll lift those away. Now the front should lift off. It's sticking. What's it sticking on? It's the cam, I think. Here, I'll unhook that. Yeah, okay. So here's our shutter assembly, and here's the camera body. Okay, well, the camera body we had no, I'm just removing these washers because they'll fall off otherwise. There are 3 washers at each position where the screws hold the front plate in place, and they are there to provide some spring load so that you can adjust the depth of the front plate relative to the film plane. So the body, we'll put that to one side. We don't believe there's a problem with that. It's going to need servicing. Just pop that to one side for a moment. Let's have a look at the shutter. Now, it does appear to me that this has been serviced before. That's not as neat a job of soldering as I would normally expect, or what I would normally expect to see with a factory job. It's tidy enough, everything's in the right place, it's been painted with black paint, but it's just not as tidy as I would have expected to see it. So that suggests that the shutter has been serviced on a previous occasion. What we're interested in seeing is whether that shutter will run down correctly. So I've got a shaft here, cocking cam, and we need a gear with it still got all its teeth involved. That one there will do nicely. I'm going to cock this manually and see how the shutter behaves. Let's set the shutter first to something more useful. It's set in the B position at the moment. That tab right down, that's B. That'd be 1, half, quarter, 1/8, 15th. I'll fit the shaft in here, rotate it clockwise to cock the shutter. That cocks smoothly and normally. If I press the release and let the shaft revolve down backwards, it rolls back until it comes to a stop. At this stage in the camera, other actions are happening, but the capping plate would come up, trip this lever, which allows this rack to continue its motion, and there's a little cam here that I can see. You probably can't see in that space, it's all black on black. As that cam is revolving round, it means that it's pulling back out of the way and the action of the shutter can fire. And there you saw the shutter fired, and it fired quite nicely to 15th of a second. So that tells us that there are no serious problems with the shutter, that it needs to be serviced, and probably not much more than that, or hopefully not much more than that. There's nothing seriously wrong with it, and that's important. You need some easy wins with things like this. You don't want to be starting with a camera that you believe just needs a service because perhaps things are sticky, but in actual fact pieces are broken and it's never going to run. There's something I wasn't expecting to see, or just idly looking at these pieces before I make the next segment of video, and down in here is a torn fragment of film. Now that's a substantial sized piece, and that is more than capable of completely jamming up the fine works of a camera. So that's interesting. I really wasn't expecting to see something like that down there. Oh well, live and learn. I'll have the body and the front section all apart now, so these pieces can be stripped out of the body for cleaning. So might as well start here by removing the meter cord and drum. On this arm is a little brass screw that stops the cord running off the pulleys. Remove that. You can lift the drum here straight off its post and unwind the meter cord. It'll come off the drum. There's just a knot on each end there. At the top of the camera, single screw in the middle of the meter drum. Let's remove that. I'm going to peel that cord off here. You'll see it's fixed into the notch in that wheel with a bit of lacquer. That'll just peel away. And I'll pull that cord through from the bottom. And if it's in good order, and they frequently are, you can reuse them. I just test it by applying a bit of tension. You don't need to go crazy. If it doesn't come apart, it's probably fit for reuse. Let's put that to one side. That's the shutter cocking rack, that can come off. Screw here on the top of the film advance. You're going to need a special screwdriver to do that job. One like this might do. That's one that I've made myself, just with a Dremel and a standard screwdriver. Here's a tip that I've made in much the same way, which I can use in a interchangeable bit screwdriver. This is held in place or with a touch of lacquer. That probably won't create any problem. It just spun loose easily enough. The lacquer there is to stop the screw coming loose by itself. It's not going to prevent you undoing it with a tool. The gear should come off the top of that shaft. I'm just poked underneath that with a scalpel blade to lift it off. It shouldn't fight much. this disc on the top here. I'm going to use 2 screwdrivers to get under the edge of that, lift that up. Now here is a tiny little spring in here. I'm zooming you in a bit. This tiny spring here. Be careful not to let that run away like it tried to do right there. Just very, very small spring. Put that carefully to one side. There's my carefully to one side parts over here. This piece should lift out. And this little drive dog here. The wheel should lift out. Again, I'm just using 2 screwdrivers to lever that out. And you shouldn't need to apply much force, it's just to overcome the stickiness of any grease. So we've got 2 screws. One here, that is very tight. And its mate over here, that's very tight too. So whoever dealt with this camera previously went a little bit overboard. I'll just use a bigger screwdriver and one that I can get a really good grip on. Keeping lots of downward pressure, plenty of torque, those screws come out. The screw head, you know, it shows some marks on it where somebody's gone crazy before. So this screw's got a spring on the top of it. I'll just unwind that, carefully put that aside. Don't want to be putting springs through any sort of cleaning process. You'll just tend to end up damaging or losing them. Here we have the little anti-backup pawl on the spacer that goes underneath it. Alright, while we're in here, I'll just pop that capping plate down and flick up its catch at the bottom to keep it out of the way. Set the mirror down out of the way, lift off this front cam and the rear cam, wriggle that out of the case. Just check that. A little bit of grease on it, which looks quite clean. The screw is damaged, that's not uncommon, probably won't cause any problems. That's the adjustment screw. You frequently don't need to touch that. Okay, at the base of the camera, 3 screws on the tripod socket, which are usually loose. One was a little bit loose, this one is sticky, like it's got Loctite or something on it, though there's nothing to see. And it doesn't really show any signs of corrosion, so I'm not sure why that was reluctant to move smoothly. This mate just winds out normally. There's our tripod socket. This piece is just the little insert in the bottom of the camera case where your film cassette sits. The rewind button needs to come off. Now you will need a tool for doing that. There's 2 things. I use this, which is a modified pair of pliers. It was just made by buying a nice cheap set of pliers at the local hardware, cutting the tip off with a disc grinder, holding this vertically in a vise, clamped firmly, centre punch between the middle of the jaws, run a small drill bit down there, then run a larger drill bit in there to the right diameter to grasp that button. It works very, very well. It was easy to make and didn't cost much at all. So I'll just grab the rewind button, hold the sprocket from turning, turn the rewind button with the pliers, it'll come off. There's a washer, a spring and the button itself. The sprocket shaft here held in the camera, single screw up here, that is loose. Push up the shaft from the bottom, come out the top. There's our sprocket. You don't need to put that through any cleaning process typically. At the top of the camera, here's the bush from the centre of the film advance. Here's the clutch. And separate the clutch. 3 components. At the base of the camera again, I'm going to unhook this spring from the rewind catch. That's the catch that keeps the rewind button in the locked position once you press it in, until you move the film advance again. Again, I'll put the spring to one side and get that lock lever out. Just swung the release lever across, which released the tension on the film advance. Just get that round to its neutral position, or what would be the neutral position. There are 3 screw heads down here. The neutral position, this is where the lock lever would drop in at the end of the film. But you can see the screws through here. 3 screws, same size as the ones that held the chrome trim on the base of the camera. Sometimes tight. And that should come out now, that shaft. Swing that release lever to one side. There's our film advance shaft. So we've got 3 screws in here. I'll just retrieve the 3 screws. On the Retina Reflex III, for some reason, just a matter of the time they were built, the grease on the film advance shaft is often exceptionally gummy, and the action of the film advance can be stiff because of that, just because of the grease. So there I have my 3 screws and the shaft. They can all go into the pile of parts for cleaning. Open the back of the camera and retrieve my take-up spool. This one has got a white plastic centre on it. It doesn't have a metal bush. Some of the earlier Retina Reflex 3 cameras have a black spool with a metal bush. You don't need to put that plastic thing through the cleaner. So what else do we need to take out? Frame counter. The screw in the middle of that frame counter is typically very, very tight. Typically won't come out with a bit of hammer assistance, and I'll have to get onto that with a hammer. Alright, this should hurry it up. Get the screwdriver firmly engaged, apply some torque, a couple of quick taps with the hammer. Doesn't want to come loose. No, I'm going to have to get something on that screwdriver and turn that. Okay, let's try applying a bit more brute force. No, it's just coming out. done. Just lift this lever out, gather up its spring. So our frame counter components consist of a spring, this little ratchet wheel, the counter dial, the frame and the screw. Which isn't quite as pretty as it once was, but no one's going to look down that hole, so we'll get away with that. That dial, don't put that through the cleaner, you might lose the paint. The other bits can go through for cleaning. Typically you won't need to strip anything else off the body. I'll just check to make sure that all the components here move smoothly. Can't say that's looking very promising, to tell the truth. I might be into this deeper than I expected. The two rear ones move smoothly, but this one here just appears a bit stiff. Let's just hold that back, release that. No, I think that'll be okay. I'll show you how we'll clean that in place. So we won't strip this stuff out of the camera. I'll get another video where I'll show you that. That's a bit of a horror show. So, I normally do the shutter, the front components separate, so it's a quick review of what we've got here to go in the cleaner. Film advance shaft, sprocket shaft, all the counter stuff you saw previously, all the screws, nothing here with any paint on it, none of the springs apart from that spring which is part and parcel of that front cam. They can all go in for cleaning. And I've got a little container here with the springs, the various springs in them. I've got some more somewhere else. These components, yeah, here's some more springs. Now these I don't put through the cleaner. You can clean this by hand. If you wanted to put this through the cleaner, there's no serious problem with it, but you'd want to disassemble it. Getting this little retaining clip off here is just a bit of an act. I'd rather not bother. The shutter release button, don't put that through. It's got a plastic component here. There's a spring in here which runs down in a little tiny pocket. Just clean that manually. The film advance knob, again I wouldn't put that through the solvent. That plastic knob might not like it. This stuff will have to be cleaned manually. It's lost its rubber buffer pad here. Here's the back catch lever. The only reason I'm not throwing this through is that you'll lose any black paint that's in that arrowhead. Doesn't look like there's much left in there anyway. So those pieces do not go through the cleaner. I'll just add the rest of the springs to that container. Put that to one side. And these pieces, what happens to these? I put them in a tin, a food tin, baked bean tin, something of that nature. I use a product made for painters to degrease surfaces before they paint. It's just called wax and grease remover. Make sure there's a good layer of that covering them, typically 25 mils, an inch, something like that. In that container I put in my ultrasonic cleaner surrounded by water. Give this 10 or 15 minutes and that solvent will get rid of all of this sticky waxy grease, and when that's done I drain those off. They go back into the ultrasonic cleaner in a bath of hot water and detergent. I use an ammonia based detergent, and they get another 10 minutes at that. Pulled out, rinsed in a sieve with plenty of hot water, and then dried with a hairdryer. And when they come back, they look like new parts. And that's how you want them when you go to put things back together. If you want to take the rewind button apart to clean it, you need a special screwdriver. I've got 3 here. This one was made with a piece of brass rod, has 2 pieces of spring steel stuck in the end. I think it was piano wire at the correct distance to engage with those holes and allow that to come apart. You could take a screwdriver and grind up the tip to leave you 2 little round ends. That will also do the job nicely. Doesn't need to cost a fortune. You can do the same with one of these interchangeable screwdriver bits. I know you can sometimes see screwdriver bits that look like this around the place. The chances of them being exactly the right size that you want are non-existent. So just a plain flat blade screwdriver tip, grind it away with a Dremel or diamond files or something of that nature to leave you what you want. Take away all the bits that don't look like the screwdriver tip you want, and you'll be left with the screwdriver tip. So that's all loose. Spin this apart. The screw can go into the cleaning. That wavy washer can go in the cleaner. Don't put these pieces through the cleaner. You'll just end up removing the black paint from the dot or the arrow on there, and it won't do this any good at all. With the body stripped down, now we need to clean the body. So the areas we need to clean are all under here. This is all the film advanced stuff and the frame counter stuff. All this needs to be cleaned of all that thick grease and dirt that you can see there. Likewise at the top, all in amongst the film advance here, that all needs to be cleaned. On the inside of the camera, down here in the take-up spool area, you'll find that there's grease underneath that spool typically, and usually at least one film chip. They breed down there, you might find dozens. So that all needs to be cleaned out. Same at the top here and at the bottom where the sprocket shaft comes through. Make sure there's no grease and dirt in there. The other areas we need to deal with are in the body here. At the top here, that's where the transfer shaft, the cam fits in at the back there. All this area will probably be quite greasy and dirty. That all needs to be clean. At the bottom here, all around this point here, this is where the drum goes for the meter. That's usually well greased, and that's usually very dirty and greasy and needs to be cleaned. You probably won't need to do anything to the control levers here. Typically they are fine. If you do have a problem where these things do not move smoothly, that's a serious problem. I've got a video coming up which will explain all about the joys of removing these control rods and replacing them correctly. And replacing them correctly, yeah, that's fun. That's fun, you can enjoy that. So all of those are areas that you'll need to clean, and how I normally clean things like that is with naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid and cotton buds. Points to watch: that mirror, you do not want to be touching it with anything, and you most certainly do not want to be touching it with a dirty, greasy cotton bud Q-tip. you won't enjoy the results. So work studiously to avoid touching that mirror with absolutely anything at all. In some cases I've found it easier to remove that mirror from the camera and put it back when I'm done working on things, particularly if I was fighting with these levers at the side, for example, or I was having to splash an awful lot of solvent around trying to clean things up. I might remove that mirror completely. Typically it's not glued in place, it's held in place with the spring tabs at these 4 points, and quite typically you can slide something under the mirror to lift it, slide something behind the mirror to push it forward, and take it out of the camera completely. Of course, once you've got it out of the camera, you've got to put it away somewhere carefully, and that is a surface silvered mirror. The silver surface is incredibly delicate. You put a fingerprint on there, the chances of you getting that fingerprint back off again are not good. So, cleaning the body, as I've said, you can just clean all this stuff with solvent. Now, this here, this is all the crusted on adhesive and remains of leatherette. What I typically do, this is where I start. I use the back edge of the scalpel blade, not the sharp edge, and I scrape this stuff off. And that adhesive has gone quite brittle, and it simply scrapes off. And I just do that all the way across there. Let's get some bit of shade on there. The light here is not helpful. You can see it's come off here quite well. I just continue that all the way around the corner and on the other side here. Once you've got all that rubbish scraped off, what works really well is to get some acetone on a Q-tip and just rub it over that area, and that'll just remove any leftover traces. You can see the stuff coming off there. That'll just remove anything that you didn't scrape off and leave you with an undamaged surface that's nice and flat, nice and clean, and ready to take the leatherettes when you reassemble the camera. So a word about the joys of acetone. It's fine for metal, doesn't affect metal, won't do metal any harm. It's not wonderful for paint, don't splash it around on the paint. And the leatherette, don't get it anywhere near the leatherette. If acetone runs down onto the leatherette, or if you have acetone on your fingers and you pick the camera up, you will leave thumbprints in the back of it, which will be there to identify the offender for all time. So take great care if you're using acetone to remove this stuff. One side's easy. You can open the door, the leatherette's way over here somewhere. You can work on this side with the acetone, no problem at all. This side you've got to be a lot more cautious. What you can do is, if you want to be sure you're not going to get into strife, remove the 3 screws, take the door off completely. That way there's no leatherette in the picture and you're less likely to make a tactical error. So I'll carry on and get all this stuff cleaned. I think we've already talked about the joys of cleaning the mechanical parts, how I do it in an ultrasonic cleaner. The reason I do it in the ultrasonic cleaner is simple, it's efficient. I used to do this work for a living. You need to be able to do the job well, and you need to be able to do it quickly. And the ultrasonic cleaner scores highly on both of those levels. If you're going to have to clean the components manually, here's some greasy parts here waiting to be cleaned. You're going to have to get your naphtha and your cotton buds and go over each part, swabbing them carefully and trying to lift the rubbish out of the teeth of the gears and things of that nature. When you get to deal with things like this is a film advance shaft, This is very sticky with dried up old grease. There's one of its fixing screws still sitting there. You're going to need to use a lot of solvent around that and a lot of poking with toothpicks and cotton buds to try and get that rubbish out there until that comes back looking like a new part. And I'll show you what a freshly cleaned one looks like. I'll zoom into the pair of them. Alright, here's a nice clean one. Everything moves very freely. You can see there's no grease jammed up in here. Metal's nice and sparkly. This tarnish on here, you can ignore that tarnish on the shaft, that's quite normal. You're not going to get rid of that with cleaning. Here's the dirty one. This spring here is absolutely clogged with filthy old grease. The end here is sticky with it. This would never work well. You end up with a lot of drag on the film advance lever, so you may not have much trouble pushing the advance lever forward against that mess, but the return spring may have a lot of trouble returning the lever to the park position without a bit of thumb assistance. So it is important to get all this rubbish out. The ultrasonic cleaner is very, very efficient at that. Cleaning by hand, you can certainly get there, but it's going to take you some time. Be prepared to spend the time.